Thank you, Dr. John. I didn't want to mutilate that.
Yeah, I was wondering what you were going to come up with.
So they also work with their daughter, Terra, who works in the office with them. So it's a family affair. And of course, they round out that energy in the office with a couple of wonderful little puppies. Is that Lily and Daisy?
Lily and Daisy.
Yeah. So without any further delay, I'd like you to welcome Dr. John, who's going to talk to us. I will stand up for about 10 minutes.
Okay, that sounds good. I actually know some of the people here in this room. My newest friend is an acupuncturist here, and this is her first time here. We just met 2 days ago.
Big snow day.
Yeah, out on the trail.
Hi.
And Robbie is a neighbor of mine, and we've known each other for a few years. And Donna Valentine is actually a patient of mine and has been a patient of mine since 1990, and I've taken care of her.
Wow.
Family. Remember when Adrian was 8 years old? Kayla must have been.
5.
Yes.
He used to
And,
adjust them on my lap.
and then also I know Don Kelly. I've known Don since 1979.
Whoa.
And
You're babies then, right?
exactly.
Yeah. Toddler.
She was a co-worker of my girlfriend at the time, and that's how I met her. And you know, if you're around Anchorage, you see everybody around Anchorage, and it's always nice to see Dawn. And Dawn knows my wife very well, and also I know Joan and Chris Koval. They are also patients of mine, and I understand they attend here too. So Dawn has asked me, you know, since I don't know most of you, that perhaps I can share my spiritual journey and also a little bit about my family and where I come from, so you can get some background of me. So would that be okay with you? And I'm okay if you want to ask questions during my talk for clarification or anything like that, because whenever you talk about food and diet, you might as well be talking about religion and politics. Because if I advocate for the way that you eat, you're going to think I'm a wonderful guy. And if I don't advocate for the way you eat, you're going to look at me a little suspiciously. And I am okay with that. Because within my journey, I fought it the whole way. And sometimes when you come to a point in your life when you have an epiphany, it's at that point where you say, you give into it to say, that is truth. So I was raised mainly in conventional religion. And so when I met and married my wife, she is very metaphysical. She's a Reiki master. She heals with energy. She understands about different planes of energies and spirits and things like that. And to me, that was something that was so foreign from my concept of spirituality, I could not wrap my head around it. But that's okay because I loved my wife. And she could be and believe whatever she wanted. So a few years ago, I had a nutritional conference in Phoenix. And she wanted to attend with me. And she also wanted to go to Sedona. Have you been to Sedona?
Yeah.
Woohoo! I just thought, well, she wants to be one with her people and hug trees and feel the energies of the vortexes and all that, and I was okay with it and fine with that. And in fact, she was going for a specific thing. She was going to meet with an Indian chief shaman by the name of Joseph White Wolf, and you can Google him. He's a dream interpreter. And so she had some dreams that she wanted to share with him, which she gave at first, emailed him, and then she was going to meet up with him and then to discuss these dreams that she's been having. So we arrived at Sedona, and I have to say, I think that's one of the most beautiful places I've ever seen in my entire life, other than maybe Southeast Alaska or Hawaii. I mean, Sedona was mind-blowing to me.
Gorgeous.
And so we woke up early the next morning. We hired a guide to take us out. And we went on about a 10-mile hike. And he took us to some Indian ruins that were about 800 years old. And I saw in these ruins a real kokopelli. You know what a kokopelli is? Okay, it's that guy that's playing a flute and he's got his leg up like this and he's got his hair back. I saw a real one on the wall. And I just thought, this is quite a wonderful experience. And so when we got back to our bed and breakfast, we were pretty exhausted. We ate dinner and then we went to bed. And then in the middle of the night, I was in a dream state. I'm dreaming. And so when you sleep, you have two different parts of your sleep. You have non-REM sleep and you have REM sleep. Have you heard these terms?
Yes.
Okay? So when you first fall asleep, you go into a very deep sleep. And then you come out of it into a REM sleep, which means rapid eye movement. And then it's a very short part, and then you go into another deep sleep, and then another REM sleep. And so as the night goes on, your deep sleeps lessen, and your REM sleeps increase. So that's why, and you dream in your REM sleep. And that's why you can remember your dreams when you first wake up in the morning. So it's in the middle of the night, and I'm in a dream state. And I'm talking to two people. And as I'm talking to these two people in my dream, behind me, way, way back, there's a light. And as I'm talking to the people, I keep turning around thinking, what is that light? And the light kept on coming closer and closer and closer. And it came in front of me, and it enveloped me. And I'm like, what is going on? All I could imagine was that Tami had received a text message on her phone, and she's holding her phone in front of my face. And so I rouse myself awake, and I swipe into the air, and I sit up, and I'm in a dark room. And I quickly look over at Tami, and she's sound asleep. Now I'm pretty unnerved at this. I didn't sleep well for the rest of the night. So the next morning, I'm driving her to go see Indian Chief Joseph White Wolf. And I said, baby, something happened to me last night. She's like, what? And I said, I'm kind of uncomfortable talking to you about it. She said, come on, John, just tell me what's going on. So I told her what had happened. And she said, the bright light came to me last night too. Wow. But it wasn't on the outside, it was on the inside. I said, exactly. Exactly. And so when I tell people this story, it completely changed my life. It completely changed my point of view of the universe. Wow. If it wasn't physical, it didn't exist. But now, I understand the way you feel and the way you know and the way you are. And so I get three responses when I tell this story. The first one, wow, what a vivid dream. It's like, oh, no. It was not a dream. It interrupted my dream. The second thing was, were you afraid? And I think it's kind of a strange question. How can anybody be afraid of a bright light? How can anybody be afraid of the sun?
Oncoming train.
And then the third question that I usually get is, did it communicate with you? And there was no form of communication, direct communication. But indirectly, it completely changed my life.
Oh, yeah.
And so from my conventional religious beliefs, I could no longer fit in that box. It wasn't something that I could say because their tenets are against this type of experience. And so at that point, it's like, I have to consider myself a spiritual person. And that's who I am. So I hope you can connect to that, to say that I connect with you, because it was an experience that just changed my life. So with that, I'd like to talk a little bit about my background. Dawn said that she would like for me to share. So my great-grandmother was born in a small Inupiat village by the name of Selawik, and it's up northwest, and it's about 90 miles east of Kotzebue. And Selawik is an Inupiat word that means the place of she-fish. Do you know what she-fish are?
No.
They're delicate white fish. And I remember as a child that we used to eat it dry, dipped in seal oil and salt. And so it's a wonderful memory that I have of eating my Alaska Native foods. And my great-grandmother, her name was Susie. And I don't ever recall being known or told what her Inupiat name was. Every Alaska Native has two names that has their English name and their indigenous name. And my indigenous name is Tuluwak, which means raven. So Susie had quite the status within her community because she was the second wife of the shaman of that area. And so the shaman was named Ptarmigan, and he had two wives. Susie was his second wife, and he had no children with her, but he had children with the first wife. And so at this time, there was a great upheaval within the culture of Alaska. So the indigenous people of the North were already familiar with the Yankee New England whalers, and they would trade often with them. And so, but there was a new wave of people that were coming into Alaska. And that second wave were the miners that were going after the gold in Nome. And so along with the miners, there was a wave of missionaries. So are you all familiar with Sheldon Jackson? Mm-hmm. Sheldon Jackson was a Presbyterian missionary based out of Sitka, which was the capital of Alaska at that time. And what Sheldon Jackson did is that he apportioned different parts of Alaska to different missionaries. So within the communities, they will have a specific church that was brought by the missionaries. And so within the Seward Peninsula area, now Seward Peninsula is Nome, Kotzebue. It is not the Kenai Peninsula.
Thank you.
So there in that area, it was the Swedish Covenant missionaries. And the Swedish Covenant missionaries taught the people that shamanism was of the devil. And they turned the people against Ptarmigan. And Ptarmigan lost all his connection to the people. And so he had nothing to do. He was the spiritual leader of the people, and he was no longer the spiritual leader. And so after losing that, they convinced Ptarmigan that if he wanted to be part of society, that he had to give up his second wife, because having more than one wife was savagery. And so he, if you can believe it, he convinced her to give up his wife. And so they took her and quickly married her to a white miner by the name of Jack Belts. So that's where the Belts clan came from that area. So my grandfather was named William Belts, and he was raised in a mining town called Haycock. And so he was an excellent student in the one-room schoolhouse. And in fact, he was so good that they recommended that he go to a boarding school in Nome, and he excelled there as a carpenter. So not all the boarding school stories are bad. And so my grandfather excelled and succeeded there. And in fact, he became a territorial senator from Unalakleet, and then later a state senator. And he was one of two Alaska Natives that were part of the Constitutional Convention. Vic Fisher is the only one alive from that convention. If you ever take a trip on Raven Airlines, along the wall is photos of that convention, and I always go by and I always see my grandfather. So that is my mother's side. My father's side, my great-grandfather was named Ferdinand Roos, and he was a German-speaking man from a German-speaking family where English was a second language. And this was in Indiana. And so he fell in love with an Irish girl by the name of Catherine McNamara. That wasn't good to Ferdinand's father. He did not approve of him falling in love with an Irish girl. And he says, if you marry her, you will be disinherited. And that's what happened. So Ferdinand and his young wife, Catherine, went to Philadelphia where he found work in shipyards. And so he and Catherine had 3 daughters, my Aunt Catherine, my Aunt Tess, and my grandmother. And so at that time with his young family, Catherine died in the 1918 pandemic, and he's left with 3 little girls. And so these girls, he took them and gave them to the Catholic orphanage.
Whoa.
That's what I thought too. As my grandmother told me this story when I was 6 years old, she said, Johnny, it was the best time in my life. The nuns were so kind, and she said, I had so many friends. And all the girls that were raised in the orphanage became nuns. And my grandmother wanted to become a nun too, but I think God and my grandfather had different plans. So whenever, I was pretty much raised by her. My parents had a say the word for me? Thank you, relationship. And so I pretty much grew up in my grandmother's home. And whenever my grandmother had to do any shopping, like for gifts or anything, she would always go to the downtown regional department store by the name of John Wanamaker's. And, are you familiar?
Well, I know the name, but
It's a Eastern regional department store. It's now a Macy's, but back then it was John Wanamaker's. And right across the small alley street is St. John's Cathedral. And St. John's Cathedral is the oldest and largest Catholic cathedral in downtown Philadelphia. And so whenever my grandmother would finish with her shopping, she would always go across the street and visit with her friends. Yeah. And so that's just I get a little emotional talking about it. So let me tell you a funny story. When I was a kid, well, in the middle of the department store, there is a very large brass eagle. And I was a wanderer and an explorer. If you let go of my hand, I was gone. Because John Wanamaker's to me was like Disneyland. And so my grandmother always said, Johnny, if we ever get separated, go to the eagle and I'll find you there. I said, okay. So Tami and I found ourselves in a conference in downtown Philadelphia, and I look out the hotel room, there's Macy's, and there's St. John's Cathedral. And I said, Tami, I got to share with you something so important of my childhood. And so we're there, now I'm dressed in my suit, she's in her dress, and we're standing in front of the brass eagle, and I'm just telling her this story that I just told you. And as I'm telling her the story, this little old nun walks up to me. This is a true story. She looked like she was about in her 90s. And she says to me, excuse me, sir, do you work here? I said, no. I said, are you from St. John's Cathedral? She said, yes. So I launch into my story. And she's looking at me. And she raises her hands and she says, I'm just looking for some shoes. She walked off. Tami said, you were expecting her to know your grandmother and recognize you. I said, exactly.
yes.
So, when I became a chiropractor, the things that I wanted to accomplish is to help people with arthritis and with pain. And then within my integrative health part of my practice, I specialize in gut health. Because it's known within natural medicine, you heal the gut, you heal the body. And so when I got my wellness certification, you have to know things about how to eat, how to move, how to think, what toxins are you exposed to on a daily basis, what are your love connections with your family and your fellow human being and the universe. And so I found myself in a strength training seminar. And so I'm surrounded by all these beefy bodybuilders and powerlifters. And the teacher up front was like the coach to the top female athletes on the planet. We're talking bodybuilding, powerlifting, MMA, you know what MMA is? MMA, and even some pole vaulters. And he said, all of his women that he coaches, all of them have torn up guts. All of them. And I'm thinking, torn up guts. You know, what does that mean? IBS, irritable bowel syndrome / diarrhea, irritable bowel syndrome / constipation, Crohn's disease, celiac, kidney stones, gallbladder stones, GERD, heartburn, H. pylori infection. What was he talking about?
All of them.
Probably. But he said all of them had torn up guts, and he had to change their diet. He said, and they all ate the same thing. Now, these are the top female athletes on the planet. Do you think top female athletes on the planet would eat junk food?
No.
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 So, he said, what were they eating?
Lots of
And so he's asking a bunch of bodybuilders and powerlifters. He says, come on, what were they eating? He says, number one, they were eating spinach salad, skinless chicken breast, brown rice, and broccoli.
Really?
Yeah,
Makes sense.
Huh.
I was like, that went completely against everything that I was ever taught. Because I was taught health comes from eating a plant-based diet. Getting away from saturated fat in meat. It was saturated fat in meat that was causing all the coronary artery disease, heart disease, stroke, in the book, the China study, cancer. How could this be? And it sent me on this quest to try and understand where we come from. Because if you look from the advocates of a plant-based diet, this is what they say. People eat meat for protein. Yes or yes?
Yeah.
They eat meat for protein. The advocates say that you can find every essential amino acid within the plant world. And in fact, I was taught in school that rice and beans have complementary amino acids. And that's why you have so many rice and bean cultures around the world. So we don't need to eat meat. They also say is that our systems are not designed to eat meat. Look at our teeth. We do not have claws and we do not have fangs. If we don't have claws and fangs, why should we eat meat? They say that meat is injurious to the planet. They say meat is murder. We don't have to have this type of relationship on this planet. We can be more plant-based. So I had to search. And I had to search and I had to find what should we eat to fulfill what these bodies need, to be nourished, to be able to thrive on this planet and have a wonderful existence with our fellow human being and with Source. So, this is what I found along my way. What's that?
Africa.
Yes! So 60 million years ago, Africa is the Garden of Eden. 60 million years ago, all of Africa is a lush jungle. And so along this way, 60 million years ago is when the primates, the hominids, split off from the rest of the animal kingdom. And 10 million years ago is when the great apes split off from that line. So we did not come from the great apes. The great apes have already split off. As we keep going up the timeline, 7 million years ago was a fossil that was found, and it was named Sahelanthropus chidensis. And they say that this is the first time they have evidence of bipedality. You know what bipedality is?
Two legs.
Walking on 2 feet. And so they surmise this all from one fossil of skull, because the foramen magnum, which means the hole in the skull, is right underneath the skull for its spine to be upright. Now this creature, Sahelanthropus chidensis, lived up in the trees and was a fruit eater. So we come from a fruit eater. And that's why we don't have claws and fangs. So, as we go down, now this timeline is going to go really fast. 4.5 million years ago, another fossil was discovered, and her name was Lucy. Have you heard of Lucy?
Yes.
Yeah.
Australopithecus afarensis. Lucy was not human. The size of her brain was about the size of a small grapefruit. And Lucy walked on 2 legs. If a time machine could be made, okay, I have a time machine in my basement, but I can't find the 1.21 gigawatts to get it to go. If we went back in time, Lucy and her gang would be walking around, looking just like us, but not human, an animal.
Not human?
Not human. What made Lucy come out of the trees?
You want us to go out on a limb here?
Lucy?
There's only so much fruit on a tree.
Lucy came out of the trees because the Garden of Eden went away. They were kicked out of the Garden of Eden. In Genesis, God says, within the garden, you can eat of any fruit of any tree, except
Tree of knowledge.
of good and evil. So, what had happened? There was a slide of the tectonic plates, and within the eastern part of Africa, there was this huge volcanic activity, and it raised up, and it all collapsed into the Great Rift Valley, and it changed the climate of Africa. And all the lush jungle disappeared in the north of Africa, and it became a huge grassland. There was nothing for Lucy to eat. That's why she came down out of the trees. What did Lucy start eating? She started scavenging the kills of the lions and the hyenas. And that change of diet is what changed everything. It was the consumption of an animal-based meat diet changed everything within our physiology. We lost our snout. Chimpanzees have snouts. Why do chimpanzees have snouts? It's because they have to grind all that vegetation that they eat. That's what softened our faces. And so, from that, everything started to speed up. Our gut begin to change because our closest relative, the chimpanzees and the great apes, have huge colons. Their rib cages go out and they have huge bellies for them to ferment and digest the vegetation that they eat. With the changeover of the diet of eating meat, our guts started to shrink and our brains started to grow. And so it was the eating of meat that was the fruit of the tree of knowledge of good and evil. And that's why we were cut out of the Garden of Eden. Why do apes and why do chimpanzees still eat vegetation? I'm asking. Say, I don't know.
I don't know, Dr. God.
If I could be jealous of anything, it'd be of that guy's voice.
Yeah. Great voice though.
So, what started to happen is that our brains started to grow. Our guts started to shrink. Our faces softened. We developed white sclera. Sclera means the whites of your eyes. Because our closest relatives, chimpanzees, have very dark sclera. Why is that? Is because chimpanzees looking at each other, that is a direct threat. And so they don't look at each other. Also, male chimpanzees don't ever share any type of food. So along the way, our teeth became smaller because we didn't have to grind all that vegetation. Our stomachs became very acidic. The chimpanzee's stomachs, about 4 to 5 in acidity. Ours is 1.5. That's thousands of times different. Our small intestines grew larger. Our colon shrunk. And it shrunk because it didn't have to ferment all that vegetation. We became upright so that we could walk. Now, with every evolutionary advantage, there's going to be a disadvantage. So what would be a disadvantage of being bipedal, of walking?
Slower.
Slow as hell. We have problems with our feet, so we need podiatrists. Our knees and our hips go bad, so we need orthopedists. Our backs are constantly aching. That's why we need chiropractors and acupuncturists. Our upper bodies began to change. We developed this huge range of motion with our shoulders. Why is this important? Because Lucy and other hominids are arboreal, meaning that they live in the trees, so they have to swing. And so if you ever see a chimpanzee throw, they throw like this. We became so divine in our development of our shoulders that human beings can throw a fastball 100 miles an hour with pinpoint accuracy. And so we move on from Lucy, we now begin to be human. Homo habilis, 2 million years ago. One thing, an advantage of being bipedal, it frees up our hands. Frees up our hands to do what?
Weapons and tools. Creativity.
Yeah. And so, with that freeing up of our hands, they used to bang rocks together and form tools called Aldewan tools. They became spears and they became axes and they became knives. The way Lucy was able to survive and going out and getting her food, being upright with the heat of the sun, a four-legged animal gets so much energy from the sun and they overheat. So in the midday, they have to go rest, where Lucy could run out and get the meat. And when a predator takes down an animal, it doesn't eat everything. eats the innards, and that's about it. Have you ever seen a bear, a grizzly bear, eat a salmon while the salmon are spawning? Have you ever seen it on TV? What they do, they rip the skin, they eat the eggs, and they walk off. And when I saw that, I thought, look at all that waste. Why don't they eat the whole thing? I couldn't understand. Now I'm beginning to understand. We as hunters, with our ability to throw spears, with our ability to run, with the ability that we lost our hair being the naked ape, that we were able to sweat and cool off as we're chasing an herbivore. And so what happens is that the herbivore will just drop dead of heat stroke. And that's how we became the most badass hunters on the planet. We did not become badass farmers or badass gatherers. We became badass hunters. And that's what made our ability, Homo erectus, 1 million years ago, to spread around the entire globe and become the top predator on the planet. Now you may think, aren't lions and tigers the top predators? They are best in their environment. We can go into any environment. But with that being the apex predator, it is up to us to take care of the ecosystem. Let me explain it another way. Yellowstone Park had a huge pack of wolves, but they used to eat the ranchers' cattle. And so the cattlemen completely destroyed the wolves of the Yellowstone Park. What did that do to the park? The buffalo and the elk completely destroyed the park by overgrazing. And it changed the environment. And people finally, in their wisdom, realized that they had to bring back the predators to keep the elk moving, to keep the elk healthy, and to keep the land healthy. One last stop along this timeline, 800,000 years ago. That's the first time that they see that there's evidence of fire. No other species on this planet uses fire for their food. Why do we?
You like marshmallows?
Totally.
You get an A.
Prometheus.
That's s'mores.
Number one, it made food much safer to be able to kill the bacteria. Another thing is that it pre-digests our food. So our food is already coming more digested. So it's more easily absorbed. And so with that, our brains grew to this huge amount because of all this nutritious food that we're getting. Now, for every advantage, evolutionary-wise, there's a disadvantage. What is the disadvantage of having this huge brain?
Overthinking.
It's hard to give birth to children with heads that big, right?
When we were kicked out of the Garden of Eden, that was the curse God gave women. You will have pain during childbirth.
That's the truth.
Men, just try imagining passing a bowling ball through a birth canal. That's why men don't give birth. The advantage of having this huge brain is that we are better able to connect with each other. We are weak animals. There is no way that we could take down this huge herbivore. We cannot compete with the lions and the tigers and the hyenas. But we could compete if we worked together. The whites of our eyes are a way to communicate, whereas the chimpanzee, you cannot. We can connect with love. It's that connection of love that allows us to work together. And that's why that's a benefit.
I think that's the fire too.
Oh, absolutely.
I think that's a big part of the fire.
Absolutely. It's what enables us to work together. Now, there are parts of my brain just do not work. Not at all. Anything with math, nothing. My bandwidth of knowledge and information is about that wide, but it's about that tall, but it's about that wide. I need you. You need me. I need you. You need me. We all need each other. And that's what has bound us together with this huge intellect. Now, another disadvantage of having this huge brain, you have an organ in your body that's 2% a part of the size of your entire body. But it takes over 25% of the calories that you have to consume every single day. What is that organ?
Brain.
The brain. And that's why other meat eaters are not human. It's because it's a disadvantage to have to feed this thing 1,500 to 2,500 calories a day to run your body and to run this brain.
So does that mean if we took up advanced calculus, we'd lose weight?
3 tablespoons of lecithin.
Absolutely. Choline, too. Choline is very good for brain health. I am not, and I know there are plant-based advocates in this room, I am not against being plant-based, okay? When we did not have animals, if we did not have the herbivores out there, we had to survive plant-based. We don't eat meat for the protein. We eat meat for the fat. Our bodies, specifically our liver and our kidney, is only able to handle about 40% of our calories to being protein. Because then all of a sudden, you're having troubles with ammonia and urea. And that's very toxic to the body. So you have to eat something else to go along with the protein. I advocate that we eat fat for the essential fatty acids. Okay? So, in the plant world, omega-6 fatty acids come from the seeds of plants. Omega-3 fatty acids in the form of a proform of omega-3 is called alpha-linolenic acid. And it's found in the leaves of plants. We cannot eat leaves. We cannot eat grass because our bodies aren't able to digest it. But the herbivores are able to eat it concentrated in their bodies. We knock them over the head, give them the blessing, and we're able to get our omega-6s and our omega-3s from them. So, for brain health, you need EPA and DHA and DPA. These are all for brain health, and we only can get them from an animal source. You all need your omega-3s. You all need to be taking fish oil every single day for your health. So what's essential? Amino acids in the form of protein, EPA, DPA, and DHA are essential fatty acids. Indigenous people do not think that animals without fat are food. There's such a thing as called rabbit sickness, and it's when people didn't have the game to hunt that they would start eating rabbits. And it was too much protein, and it destroyed their liver and their kidney. So, that's pretty much what I have to say coming here.
Just a little bit, Ben, that was a lot.
I saw firsthand.
I have a question about what you said about divine development. I would be curious to what is your concept of that?
when I say divine development, is that our brains reached a level of consciousness to understand that there's more than just this stuff. That we are able, with that divinity, to be able to connect with our fellow human being. And we would not have become human if we could not have connected with each other and worked together to get our food.
I just had a really quick question.
Sure.
So fish oil and krill, right? I take krill every day, and I'm gonna have some dental surgery, and they said, don't take krill because it makes you bleed. Would you say you have to stop it way ahead of time, or just the day, a couple days ahead of the surgery?
Well, as Donna could attest to, is that I believe in testing. Let's test your vitamin D level before giving the recommendation that you need to take vitamin D. Let's check your omega-3 levels to see where you are optimally. And I would agree, because a lot of people who have issues heart-wise, they take lots of fish oil to thin their blood instead of taking, I think the medication is Coumadin.
Coumadin.
Yeah. Question?
Well, you said the grass, what about wheatgrass though? Isn't that like super nutritious?
Isn't like a former owner of organic?
Go Steve. Go Louis.
Let me put it this way. I see supplements in Natural Pantry that says oyster shell calcium. Have you ever eaten an oyster shell?
Every day.
No. You can't digest oyster shells. I also see calcium carbonate as being the first ingredient.
That's chalk.
Who said that? You are absolutely right. You might as well take the lime that you spread on your lawn and just eat that. You can't absorb it. It has to be in an absorbable way. If
But
you
what about
can't-
the angstrom level?
if we can't digest grass, we can't digest wheatgrass either. And I know that goes against the main part of your restaurant.
Well, certainly we don't digest the blades, but squeezing the juice out of them,
You can,
we can't seem to find anything negative about that.
or putting it, using it as blood, having the same, blood, or is that seawater? Coconut water.
Well, he's speaking about the central atom in hemoglobin would be iron, so it's red, and the central atom in chlorophyll is magnesium, so it's green. So the scientific explanation is that when you take in the wheatgrass juice, within several hours, the central atoms switch out and the chlorophyll transforms itself into hemoglobin, which makes it one of the fastest ways to come out of anemia, which makes it really good for, say, pregnant women, nursing mothers, because it safely builds up the iron in the blood.
And I would have to study that. So I can't comment on what you said, because I would have to read and see the where that came from. Yeah, back here?
I just have a question on, I really enjoyed your discussion of the historical, timeline, and I'm wondering if if you see a trajectory of the continuing divine development of the human being, and if you see any changes to what we might be consuming in the future.
Crystal ball time.
Just curious.
What would it be like in a million years?
A lot more patience.
The only way I could answer that is from the question that I get, are we still developing evolutionary wise? And the answer is yes. And the quickest is culturally. We're changing so fast culturally. And my whole talk is evolution is based upon not the survival of the fittest, but the survival of the ones who can adapt the best. And so when the miners and the rest of the white population came to Alaska, the Alaska natives who had difficulty acclimating and adapting to the dominant culture, they're the ones who sustained the trauma. And we continue to see the generational trauma down on our streets.
Is that with or without the virus aspect of 1919 or 2019?
I'll get to that. I just need to finish my thought on this. I don't want you to think that's Alaska Native culture. Because with the corporations, the native corporations, you should see all the good that is happening within the Alaska Native culture. I escaped that generational trauma. My mother did not. And so everybody is different. You will have success stories. You will have not success stories. So, okay? And yes.
So you're saying animals are okay, protein, but the animals should be eating grass, not grain and crap like that.
Absolutely. They have to be eating what they have to eat. Because if they're eating high omega-6, such as the seeds of plants, which is omega-6, highly inflammatory. For you to even try and balance your omega-6 with omega-3, that's why I recommend supplementing with fish oil. Yes.
Well, and
we'll get to it.
that's what I was going to also see what you would say on that, because, when we look at the ratio that a lot of, science gives us, we're looking at the 4-to-1 ratio, the 6-to-3, and in some cases the 1-to-1 ratio. And then when people go and look at a supplement that says that I got my total EFAs, my 6 and my 3s, they're not regarding what they're eating in their diet. And that's what we find is when those people have the 1-to-20 ratio, that we're not supposed to be, creates all these issues in the body, things like perimenopausal and stuff like that. So I think that's really important that we look at what we're doing in our total diet, because every cracker, cookie, and cake that we eat has the EF6. And so we need to make sure that we have that balance of the 6 and the 3. What do you think of that?
You're absolutely correct. There's nothing I could add to that. In regard to gut health, it's the vegetables that give us most of the issues. That was something that was very hard for me to grasp. And just to let you know, my wife does not agree with me on this point. And that's okay, because she hasn't studied what I have studied.
When you say issues, you mean negative issues.
Yeah, see, the number one thing that you really, if you have trouble with your gut, the number one thing you need to eliminate from your diet is gluten,
Yes.
which is a plant lectin. It tears up your gut. Another thing that tears up your gut is oxalates. Oxalates are extremely dangerous. They accumulate in your body, and you don't even know it's accumulating because your body is coping as best as possible. It isn't until you start developing symptoms. And when you start developing symptoms, you are already in trouble.
What is an
What is
oxalate?
Yeah, what provides
And
oxygen?
what's a symptom?
Boy, those are all good questions.
What is it?
Yeah, I've never heard of it.
An oxalate is a plant defense molecule. And what it does, it's a negatively charged chemical that binds to other minerals. So it's an anti-nutrient. It takes minerals out of your body. And so as these, and when this combination is called a salt, and with oxalates, it forms what is known as raphites. And these raphites are like needles and sticks. And it's the number one thing that kidney stones are made of, calcium oxalates. And so
Right.
if you ever wake up in the morning and your eyes are all grainy and sandy, that's your body trying to get rid of oxalates.
Sleepy seeds?
Yes. If you ever go pee and you see how cloudy your urine is, those are oxalates. Your body is trying to get rid of oxalates. Okay? You can Google high oxalate foods. The number one, you're gonna hate it. You're gonna hate what I'm gonna say. Turmeric.
Interesting.
Okay, I got one other thing that I'd like to say, and Louis hasn't stood up yet.
He just stood up.
Turmeric.
Those are fighting words.
Huge difference what happens to turmeric when it's cooked. Like a lot of things. That's why Ayurveda has so much wonderful bases in it, because there's a magical alchemy that's created. That's why they have that khichdi as one of their main food sources, is because of what happens with fire. Just like he was saying.
You can reduce the toxicity of vegetables if you follow what our four ancestors used to do. They would soak their nuts. Why soaking the nuts? It gets rid of the toxins within the nuts.
Yes.
Why do you think squirrels always bury their nuts before they eat them? The moisture of the ground leaches out the toxins. You have to soak. You have to ferment. Okay? Cabbage is very toxic.
Right.
Why do you think our ancestors fermented it? It's to reduce the toxins. Okay? You're going to have trouble if you eat a lot of raw vegetables.
Same with maca.
The reason why vegetables are very toxic is because they don't have claws and fangs to run around to get away from their predators. If you have gut issues, go more towards a carnivore diet. Do it for a couple of months. Then start adding things back into your diet. Cook your vegetables. Make sure your vegetables are cooked.
So bacon's good for you?
Yeah, strip at a time.
I know I gave you a lot of food for thought. I do realize this.
You've said that before, I bet.
Doctor, you gave a lot to digest.
You didn't say that.
Wow.
Absolutely.